My name is Nora, and I never thought I would be standing in the governor's mansion with a glass of champagne in my hand, while my mother pretended she didn't spend 15 years being embarrassed to claim me as her daughter. Let me start at the beginning, because that is the only way this makes sense. I grew up in a small town called Harrison Mills, about an hour outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. The kind of town where everyone knows your daddy's daddy, and your credit score is common knowledge at the diner. My family, the Canes, were what you would call old respectability. Not rich, but proud. The kind of proud that hurts worse than poverty. My father was a deacon at First Baptist Church. My mother chaired the garden club for 6 years straight. My older sister Charlotte married a dermatologist, and my younger brother William went to Duke for law school. And then there was me, Nora, the one who got pregnant at 19. I can still feel the way my mother's hand felt on my arm that afternoon, clawing, like she was trying to dig the shame right out of my skin. We were in her kitchen, the same kitchen where she taught me to make pie crust, and she looked at me with these eyes that were more disappointed than angry. That was worse. She said, "Nora, what will people think?" Not, "How are you feeling?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Who is the father?" Just, "What will people think?" I told her the father was a boy named Chase, who worked at the auto parts store. We had been together for 6 months. He was sweet in a lazy way, the kind of sweet that shows up with flowers but forgets to pay his phone bill. When I told him I was pregnant, he said he needed time to think. Then he drove to Myrtle Beach with his cousin, and I never heard from him again. My father sat me down in his study. He had this big leather chair that squeaked when he leaned back. He said, "Nora, we are not a family that has babies out of wedlock." He said it like I had chosen to bring disgrace on purpose, like I woke up one morning and decided to ruin the Kane name for fun. I asked him if he wanted me to get an abortion. The silence that followed was so loud I thought my ears would bleed. He stared at me. Then he said, "We don't say that word in this house." Then he told me to go to my room. I kept the baby, a little girl I named Mabel. She came out with a full head of dark hair and my father's eyes. I loved her so much it felt like my chest was splitting open. But my family looked at her like she was a stain on the good tablecloth. My mother refused to tell her friends I was a mother. She said things like, "Nora is helping care for a child," or "Nora has taken in a little one." She never said granddaughter, not once in the first 3 years. I lived in a small apartment above a garage on the edge of town. The landlord was an old man named Mr. Hendricks who smelled like motor oil and pipe tobacco. He charged me $400 a month and never raised the rent because he said I had a good heart. I worked double shifts at a diner called the Rusty Spoon. I waited tables from 6 in the morning until 2, then again from 4 until 10. My feet would swell inside my shoes. My back ached constantly. But I made enough for Mabel's diapers and formula, and later her little shoes and her art supplies. Mabel was 3 when I first realized my family was truly ashamed of me. It was Easter Sunday. I made the mistake of thinking maybe this year would be different. Maybe they would want to see their granddaughter in her little yellow dress with the white lace collar. I spent $40 I didn't have on that dress. We walked into my parents' house, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees. My sister Charlotte looked at Mabel like she was inspecting a piece of questionable fruit. My brother William said nothing at all, just stared at his phone. My mother took me aside in the pantry and said, "Nora, you cannot keep showing up like this. You are not married. It makes people uncomfortable." I asked what people. She said everyone. I laughed without eating a single bite of the ham. Mabel cried in the car because she wanted a chocolate egg. I cried too, but I wiped my face before she could see. That was the year I stopped going to family holidays. That was the year I started building a wall between me and the Canes. But Mabel grew up smart, smarter than anyone in our family had a right to be. She started reading at 4. She could do multiplication in her head at 6. By the time she was 10, she was winning spelling bees and science fairs, and the teachers at her school would call me just to say, "Your daughter is extraordinary." I would come home from my shifts with grease under my fingernails and find her at the kitchen table, doing homework with no one to help her. I never went to college. I barely passed high school. But Mabel would explain things to me. She would say, "Mom, look at this equation. Do you see how the numbers balance? And I would nod and pretend I understood, but really I was just watching her. Watching this brilliant, beautiful girl that I somehow made. This girl that my family refused to claim. When Mabel was 12, she asked me why we never saw Grandma and Grandpa. I told her the truth. Not the mean version, but the honest version. I said, they have a hard time accepting some of my choices, and sometimes it's better to love people from far away. She looked at me with those dark cane eyes and said, "That's stupid." I laughed so hard I cried. Mabel got a scholarship to a private high school in Raleigh, a full ride based on her grades and her test scores. The letter came in the mail on a Tuesday. I read it 3 times, standing in my kitchen. Then I sat down on the linoleum floor and sobbed. Not because I was sad, because I was so proud I thought I would explode, and no one in my family would care. I called my mother anyway. I don't know why. Some stupid hope that never dies, no matter how many times it gets kicked. I told her about the scholarship, and she said, "Well, that's nice, dear, but, private schools are full of uppity people." She said it like it was a bad thing to be around people with money and ambition, like Mabel shouldn't reach higher than a diner and a garage apartment. I didn't tell Mabel I called. I just drove her to Raleigh every morning at 5:30 so she could catch the bus. Then I drove back to Harrison Mills and worked my shifts and picked her up at 6 and helped her with homework I didn't understand. We did that for 4 years. 4 years of early mornings and late nights and me falling asleep at stop signs. But Mabel thrived. She made friends with kids whose parents were doctors and lawyers and CEOs. She went to their houses and saw how they lived. She came home and told me about marble countertops and heated floors, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not jealousy, determination. She got into UNC Chapel Hill on a full academic scholarship. The day she got her acceptance letter, she screamed so loud the neighbors called to make sure we were okay. She hugged me so hard I felt her ribs. She said, "Mom, we made it." And I said, "No, baby, you made it. I just drove the car." My family heard about the scholarship through the grapevine. Suddenly, my mother wanted to have lunch. Suddenly, my father called to say how proud he was of his granddaughter. They had never called her that before. Granddaughter. The word felt foreign in my ears. I met my mother at a cafe in Raleigh, and she sat across from me with this smile I hadn't seen in years. She said, "Nora, we were thinking maybe Mabel could come stay with us for a weekend, get to know her grandparents." I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell her where she could shove that offer. But Mabel had never really known that side of the family, and some part of me still wanted her to have what I didn't. So I said okay. Mabel went to stay with them for a weekend and came back quiet. She didn't say much about it, just that Grandma talked a lot about what people thought, and Grandpa asked her if she was going to join a sorority. But something shifted after that. My mother started showing up at my apartment, bringing casseroles, asking about my life. It felt strange and wrong, like wearing someone else's skin. Then my mother called me one night and said, "Nora, your father has been talking to some people about you, about what you could do with your life." I almost laughed. I was 33 years old, waiting tables and raising a teenager. What life was there to do something with? But she was serious. Apparently, my father had been having coffee with a man named Frank, who knew a man named Bill, who knew someone in the governor's office. I didn't pay much attention. I had heard my father's promises before. He was a big talker in a small town. That was all. Except it wasn't. A month later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. It was a woman named Diane who said she worked for Governor Sarah Mitchell's re-election campaign. She said they had heard about me through some community connections, and they were looking for someone with my story to be part of a new initiative, something about working families and single mothers and economic mobility. I thought it was a scam. I told Diane I wasn't interested and hung up. She called back 3 times. Finally, I listened. She said the governor wanted to meet me, in person, in the governor's mansion. I laughed so hard I dropped my phone, but Diane was persistent. She sent me an email with official letterhead and a phone number I could verify. I checked everything. It was real. So I told my mother, because she wouldn't stop asking, And she said, "Of course it's real. Your father made this happen." And that's when I understood. My father had been pulling strings, calling in favors, using his old church connections and his Rotary Club friendships to get someone's attention. He had been ashamed of me for 15 years, but now I had something he could use, a story, a narrative, a single mother who pulled herself up by her bootstraps, a redemption arc. I was angry. I was so angry I couldn't see straight. But I was also tired. Tired of waiting tables. Tired of my feet hurting. Tired of watching Mabel work twice as hard as everyone else because we didn't have connections or money or a last name that opened doors.
So I put on my best dress and I drove to Raleigh. The governor's mansion is beautiful in a way that feels almost aggressive, like it's daring you to forget your place. I parked my 10-year-old Honda next to a black SUV and walked up to the front door with my heart hammering against my ribs. A woman in a gray suit opened the door and smiled like she had known me my whole life. Diane met me in the foyer. She was warm and sharp at the same time. She asked if I wanted coffee or water or something stronger. I asked for water. She laughed and said that was the right answer. Governor Sarah Mitchell was not what I expected. She was tall and blonde and looked like she had never doubted herself for a single second of her life. But when she shook my hand, she held on for an extra beat, and she looked at me with these eyes that had seen things. She said, "Nora, I've read your file. You've worked hard, you've sacrificed, you raised a brilliant daughter while working double shifts and living above a garage. Why hasn't anyone in your family bragged about you?" That question hit me like a punch to the chest. I couldn't answer. I just stood there with my mouth open like a fish. She smiled. She said, "I thought so." She said, "Most people don't have anyone in their corner, and the ones who do don't always appreciate it." She said, "I want you to be the face of a new program we're launching. It's called Pathways. It helps single mothers get job training, housing assistance, and childcare support.
And I want you to tell your story, on camera, at the press conference." I said, "I'm not a public speaker." She said, "You don't have to be. You just have to be yourself." I said, "I don't have the right clothes or the right words or the right anything." She said, "We'll take care of all of that." I said, "Why me?" She leaned in. She said, "Because your family should have lifted you up, and they didn't. And I want everyone in this state to see what happens when someone finally does." I cried in the governor's bathroom for 10 minutes after that. Then I washed my face and walked back out and said yes. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings and phone calls and people measuring me for clothes I never could have afforded. A stylist named Erica showed up at my apartment with racks of blazers and blouses and trousers. She looked at my closet, which was mostly jeans and diner t-shirts, and she didn't say a single judgmental thing. She just held up a blue blazer and said, "This is your color." Mabel thought the whole thing was hilarious. She was home from UNC for the summer, and she would sit on my bed while Erica worked and make little comments like, "Wow, Mom, look at you turning into a politician." I threw a pillow at her. She threw it back. For the first time in a long time, my apartment felt full of something good. But my family, oh, my family. My mother called me every day. She wanted details. She wanted to know who I was meeting with and what I was wearing, and whether the governor had mentioned the Kane family by name. My father started calling me sweetheart, which he hadn't done since I was 12. Charlotte texted me out of nowhere asking if I needed help with Mabel. William sent me a LinkedIn request. These were the same people who had looked the other way for 15 years, the same people who made me feel like a mistake at every holiday, the same people who refused to say granddaughter until it became convenient. I tried to be gracious, I really did. I told myself they were trying. I told myself people change. But then my mother said something that broke something inside me for good. She came to my apartment uninvited a few days before the press conference. She walked in with a casserole dish and started looking around like she was inspecting the place. She said, "Nora, you know your father and I are so proud of what you've accomplished, but we think it's time you moved back home, just until things settle down. People might talk otherwise. A single mother living alone in this part of town, it doesn't look right." I stared at her. I said, "Mom, I've been living alone in this part of town for 15 years. Where were you then?" She blinked. She said that was different. I said, "How?" She said, "You were different then." I asked her to leave. She looked at me like I had slapped her. She left the casserole on the counter. I threw it in the trash as soon as she walked out. Not because it was bad, because I couldn't stand to eat something that came from her hands that day. The press conference was held at a community center in Durham. The room was packed with reporters and cameras and people I didn't know. I stood behind a podium with the governor next to me, and I held my speech in my shaking hands. I had practiced it 100 times. But when I looked up and saw my mother sitting in the front row, I almost lost it. She was wearing a pearl necklace that had belonged to my grandmother. She was smiling like she had won something, like she had been there all along, like she hadn't spent 15 years being embarrassed to claim me. I looked past her. I found Mabel standing against the back wall. She was wearing the same yellow dress I had bought her for Easter 12 years ago. Well, not the same one, but the same color. She knew. She remembered. She smiled at me and nodded. I took a breath. I told my story. I talked about the garage apartment with the leaky faucet. I talked about the diner shifts and the swollen feet, and the nights I went to bed hungry so Mabel could have seconds. I talked about the family who turned their backs, and the boy who ran away, and the shame I carried like a backpack full of bricks. I talked about Mabel and her scholarships, and her brilliance, and the way she explained math problems to me, even though I never understood the answers. I did not name my parents. I did not need to. My mother's face turned the color of old milk.
My father shifted in his seat like the chair was on fire. The reporters scribbled notes. The cameras rolled. And when I finished, the room was silent for a full 3 seconds before people started clapping. The governor put her hand on my shoulder. She said Nora Kane is proof that hard work and dignity matter more than pedigree. She said this state failed women like Nora for too long, and with Pathways, we are going to change that. The story went viral, not nationally, but in every local news outlet and every social media feed in North Carolina. People shared the video of my speech. They wrote comments about single mothers and family betrayal and the cost of keeping up appearances. My mother stopped answering her phone. My father left me a voicemail that was just him breathing for 20 seconds before he hung up. Charlotte sent me a long text about how I had humiliated the family. I didn't respond. William called me ungrateful. I blocked him. Mabel came home with a stack of newspapers and spread them out on my kitchen table. She said, "Mom, you did it. You said the thing everyone was too scared to say." I asked if she was embarrassed. She looked at me like I had grown a second head. She said, "Embarrassed? Mom, I have been embarrassed my whole life when people asked about my family, but I have never been embarrassed of you. Not once." That was the night I realized my family had been wrong about everything. Not just wrong about me, wrong about the whole world. They thought shame was something you inherit, like eye color or height. But shame is something you choose, and I was done choosing it. The Pathways program launched 2 months later. I was hired as a community outreach coordinator. My job was to travel across the state and talk to single mothers in rural towns and small cities. I told them my story. I listened to theirs. I saw the same exhaustion in their eyes that I used to see in my own reflection. And I told them what the governor told me. You don't have to be a public speaker. You just have to be yourself. I moved out of the garage apartment. Mabel helped me pack. We found old photos and baby teeth and a library card she had signed up for when she was 5. We found the yellow Easter dress stuffed in the back of a closet. I held it up and Mabel said, "You should burn it." I said no. I should keep it. To remember. My mother tried to make amends 6 months later. She showed up at my new apartment, which was a real apartment with 2 bedrooms and a dishwasher that worked. She brought a fruit basket and a card with a long handwritten note about family bonds and forgiveness. I read the card while she stood in my living room, looking at my furniture like she was taking inventory. I said, "Mom, I love you, but you don't get to show up now and pretend you were always there. You don't get to claim credit for the life I built. You don't get to wear Grandma's pearls to my press conference and smile like you helped." She said, "I'm your mother." I said, "That doesn't mean what you think it means." She left the fruit basket on my counter. I ate the grapes because they were good, but I didn't call her to say thank you. Mabel graduated from UNC with honors. She's in law school now at the University of Virginia.
She calls me every Sunday and we talk for an hour about nothing and everything. She has a boyfriend named Jordan who is a civil engineer, and he calls me ma'am, which I hate, but also secretly love. She still wears yellow sometimes. She says it's our color now. Last week, I got an invitation to the governor's annual holiday reception. It was addressed to Nora, Kane, and guest. I almost threw it away, but then I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who got pregnant at 19 and cried in the pantry while her mother told her she made people uncomfortable. That girl deserved to walk into the governor's mansion with her head high. I brought Mabel as my guest. We wore matching blue dresses that Erica, the stylist, picked out. We walked through the front doors together, and I did not think about my parents or my sister or my brother. I thought about the garage apartment. I thought about the diner shifts. I thought about Mabel's first steps and her first words, and the way she used to reach for me in the middle of the night. The governor found me by the punch bowl. She said, "Nora, I'm glad you came." She said, "We're expanding pathways to 3 more counties next year." She asked if I wanted to help train the new coordinators. I said yes before she finished the sentence. And that's when I saw her, my mother, standing near the fireplace with a glass of champagne. She was looking at me, not with shame or disappointment or irritation, just looking, like she was seeing me for the first time. I walked over to her. I didn't plan it. My feet just moved. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. I said, "Mom, I'm not here to fight. I'm not here to forgive you either. I'm here because I worked too hard to miss this party. You can be proud of me or not. That's your choice. But either way, I'm not going back to being the person you were ashamed of." She didn't say anything. She just nodded. Then she looked at Mabel, who was standing a few feet away, talking to a state senator about education policy. My mother said, "She looks beautiful." I said, "She always has. You just never looked." I walked back to Mabel and took her hand. We stayed for another hour. We ate the little sandwiches and the fancy cookies. We took a photo in front of the Christmas tree. And then we left. Just the two of us, the way it always should have been. Driving home that night, Mabel fell asleep in the passenger seat. The highway was dark and quiet, and I thought about all the mornings I drove her to Raleigh, all the nights I picked her up, all the miles between who I was and who I became. My family was ashamed of me for 15 years, but the governor didn't change anything. She just gave me a microphone. I was the one who finally spoke. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a minute. Mabel stirred but didn't wake up. I looked at my apartment with the lights off and the porch light on, and I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not at my mother or my father or Chase or anyone else. I was just tired and free, and maybe that was enough. The next morning, I woke up to a text from an unknown number. It said, "Nora, this is Chase. I heard about the press conference. I just wanted to say I'm proud of you." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I deleted it and blocked the number and made coffee. Some doors don't need to stay open. Some doors should have been locked a long time ago. Mabel came downstairs in her pajamas. She poured herself a cup of coffee, even though I told her caffeine stunts your growth. She's 23. She doesn't care about growing anymore. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "Mom, what are you thinking about?" I said, "I'm thinking about Easter. The yellow dress, the chocolate egg." She said, "That was a sad day." I said, "Yeah, it was. But it wasn't the end of the story." She smiled. She said, "What's the end of the story?" I looked at her dark cane eyes and her stubborn chin and her brilliant, messy brain that somehow came from me. I said, "I don't know yet, but I'm not afraid to find out." And that's the truth. I spent 15 years being someone my family could barely look at. I spent 15 years apologizing for existing. And then one day, a governor gave me a chance to tell the truth, and everything changed. But not because of her, because I finally believed I deserved to be seen. My family was ashamed of me until the governor changed everything. That's the title I would give this story if it had one, but it's not accurate. The governor didn't change anything. She just held the door. I was the one who walked through. Mabel finished her coffee and went to get dressed. She had a study group for her constitutional law class. I had a meeting with a single mother in Fayetteville who was working 2 jobs and raising 3 kids and sleeping 4 hours a night. I knew her story because it was my story, and I was going to tell her what I wish someone had told me a long time ago. You are not a stain on the tablecloth. You are not a mistake. You are not someone to be whispered about in pantries. You are a woman who built something out of nothing, and if your family can't see it, that's their loss, not yours. I grabbed my keys and my coat and my bag full of brochures and business cards. I looked at myself in the mirror by the front door. My hair was grayer than it used to be. My face had lines I didn't have 5 years ago, but my eyes looked different, lighter, like someone had opened a window in a room that had been dark for a very long time. I walked out the door and locked it behind me. Mabel was already in her car, backing out of the driveway. She honked twice. That was our thing. 2 honks meant I love you. 1 honk meant hurry up. I got in my car and drove to Fayetteville. The sun was coming up over the trees. The highway was quiet, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't thinking about what people thought. I was just driving, just living, just being Nora. That's the whole story. Or maybe it's just the beginning. Either way, I'm not looking back anymore. I've spent enough time in rearview mirrors. It's time to see what's in front of me. My name is Nora Kane. I am a mother. I am a survivor. I am not ashamed. And if my family can't handle that, they can keep their casseroles and their pearls and their garden club memberships. I don't need any of it. I have Mabel. I have my voice. I have a job that matters. And that's more than enough. The end.